maybe, you're supposed to be getting a promotion at work. That's good. You're all chipper about the promotion at work. And you walk into your boss's office because he or she wants to see you. And they say, well, we've reviewed your performance over the last few years. And your performance has been somewhere between mediocre and decent. And we're downsizing and see you later. That's not a raise or a promotion, that's for sure. That's a hole that you fall into. And the question is, well, what do you make of that, right? How do you frame that? How do you take that emergent chaos and make habitable order out of it? You don't know. Is the whole capitalist system rotten to the core? I mean, that's a convenient explanation under those circumstances, that's for sure. Were you working for a psychopathic son of a bitch? Did you make the wrong choice in university, and was that your father's fault because you never did what you want, or was it your fault for not standing up to him? Or is it a dying industry, or is maybe this a wake-up call that you should go do something else that you've been waiting to do, that you've actually wanted to do your whole life, and that's why you're doing such a miserable job at your current occupation because you're bitter and resentful about the fact that you never did what you want? You don't know. It's all of those things at once. And that's very stressful because all of those things at once is too many things. And that's the reemergence of chaos. That's the flood. That's the return to the beginning of the cosmos. That's another way that it's been represented mythologically. It's that you voyage all the way back to the beginning of the cosmos when there's nothing but undifferentiated chaos. And that's what you're confronting. And maybe it's too much for you. And often it is. I mean, that can be traumatizing. It can hurt your brain. It's just too much for you to bear. But it doesn't matter. You're stuck with it. And so how do you respond to that? Well, some of it is catastrophic negative emotion. You freeze, and that's protective. And maybe you don't even want to move. You don't want to bloody well get out of bed for a week. And that's because your body is reacting as if the bedroom floor is covered with snakes. And the best thing for you to do is just not move. Just freeze. Not a pleasant situation to be in because you're hyper aroused. Very, very physiologically demanding, and there's zero about it that's productive, except maybe the snakes won't see you. But they've already seen you, so that isn't helping very well. So you've got all this undifferentiated negative emotion, anxiety, fear, hurt, anger, guilt, shame, emotional pain, the whole plethora of catastrophes. And then maybe on the other side, lurking down there is, thank God I'm done with that job. I just bloody well hate it. I drag myself off to work every day. And there's a little part of my soul that's so goddamn happy I finally got fired that I can hardly stand it. And maybe you don't even admit that to yourself because, well, that would mean that all that time you spent at the job was just sunk cost. You're deluding yourself the whole time. It is an interesting thing to consider, though, sometimes if you're in the unpleasant circumstance of having to fire someone. Sometimes firing someone is the best thing that can happen to them, which doesn't mean that you should go out and, enjoy it. Although I have met very disagreeable people who actually enjoyed firing people. I'll tell you a story about that at some point because it's quite interesting. But, sometimes if someone's just limping along in their job and doing it as miserably and wretchedly as they possibly can imagine, the best thing you can do for them is to say, you're failing at this. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to be failing at absolutely everything else in the entire world. So maybe you should just accept the damn failure and go off and try something new. And I mean, that's terrifying for people, and I know they hate it and all that, but sometimes it's better than the alternative, which is just slow, torturous death. So here's a funny way of looking at it. So let's say you fall right into that hole that's underneath everything, and you've hit an anomaly that you don't understand. You say, what's that anomaly made out of? Exactly. I know that's a strange way of thinking about it, because it's not, but you could say, we'll just go along with that. It's a metaphor. What's that anomaly made out of? Well, here's a way of thinking about it. It's made out of spirit and matter. And here's why. This is something I learned in part from Piaget. He said, well, it's made out of matter because, of course, that's the world, matter. And the world is also what matters. And so that's kind of a nice duality there. But it's made out of spirit because when you encounter something anomalous and go down the rabbit hole, when you go into the underworld that's underneath everything that you've relied on, you learn things down there. So what's down there is information. And that now, it's maybe way more information than you want, but it is information. It's information. And what can you do with the information? You can inform yourself with the information, right? You can put yourself in formation with the information. That's helpful too. And so, and you think, well, you're a psyche. Maybe you're not a spirit. It depends on, whether you're a materialist or not, but at least we can say that you're a psyche. The question is, what's your psyche made of? Well, it's obviously got a material substrate, but the matter happens to be arrayed in a particular order, and that's an information order. And so when you fall into the underworld that's underneath everything and you encounter that latent information, then what you can do is enhance your psyche. You can grow your spirit, because what you do is you take the new information and you incorporate it. That's like eating the apple that Adam and Eve ate. You incorporate that, and that makes more of you. And that's not a metaphorical or a metaphysical proposition. It's to say nothing other than, well, that's what happens when children learn. You think of what happens. Child's 3, has a pretty low resolution representation of the world, and is a fairly low resolution human being. Got all the constituent elements there, but isn't differentiated in any tremendous manner. That's all still to come in the future. And so what does the child do? Explore. Well, what do they explore? Things they don't understand. That's where the information is, because you already understand what you understand. There's no information there. You go where you don't understand. That's where the information is. And out of that information, you generate a higher resolution world, and you generate a higher resolution self. And so out of the combat with the underlying dragon of chaos, you generate spirit and matter. And that's what you do when you go down into the underworld. So if it doesn't kill you, or if it doesn't make you wish you were dead, which it probably will. But there's a bunch of you that has to die down there anyway, so maybe that's not such a bad thing, because if you had this relationship that ended in betrayal, then there's something that's just not exactly right? There's something that went, and the reason I'm saying that, think, well, that's kind of moralistic. It's like, actually, I don't mind being moralistic, in case you haven't noticed. But it's not a fair comment, because you're playing this stupid game. It's like you live with someone, infidelity. That's the game, right? You've decided the rules. With the game comes a morality. The morality are the rules of the game. Well, then the thing collapses into infidelity. It's like, well, you played the game wrong, or it was the wrong game. One of those two. It's one of those two. You picked the damn game. And having picked the game, you can't all of a sudden say, well, no, those aren't the rules. It's like, yeah. If you pick the game, you pick the rules. And if you fail at complying with the rules, then you failed. Now, you could say, well, I could pick a different game. It's like, I don't care how you solve the problem. You're still stuck with the problem. It's a moral problem, fundamentally. And it might take some major league retooling to fix it. So you're at point A, trying to get to point B. That's not working out. You hit an anomaly. You're not getting to point B, that's for sure. You're a medical school student. You write your MCATs, which is this test you have to write to go to medical school. You get 25th percentile. I don't know who you are, but you're not a pre-med student. And maybe you never were. Right? And that's the rub, man. And so, who the hell are you? You don't know. Collapse down here into this motivational conflict, this place of motivational and emotional uncertainty and tremendous information, right? It's a place of transformation. It's the phoenix that burns. It's the burning part of the phoenix that burns. It's the journey to the underworld. It's the journey to hell. It can really be a journey to hell, because you may find out that the reason that your partner betrayed you, or that you didn't get your damn promotion, is because there's seriously something wrong with you, and you know it. And I don't just mean that you don't know what you're doing. I mean that there's 25% of you that is seriously aiming at things not being good. And so you fall into the underworld and you find out that, God, I just got exactly what I was aiming for. Or I got exactly what the worst part of me was aiming for. And that worst part, that's something to clean up, and that's not going to be easy, because it's got its hooks in me like something ferocious, something seriously ferocious. And I've been toying with it for a very long time, and maybe I can't even detach it anymore. And so that's not so fun. And you see people like that in psychotherapy very frequently, or you see them wandering around on the streets like absolute catastrophic former shells of themselves, because they've hit the underworld and they ended up in hell, and there's no getting out of it. And so those are the people you tend to give a wide berth to when you walk down the street. So there you are, down in the underworld. right back where the latent information exists, and just too much of it. And that's this. It's the same thing. It's the same thing, and that's why the Adam and Eve story is archetypal, right? Because we're always ingesting something new that knocks us into a new state of self-consciousness. And it's always a catastrophic demolition of our previous paradise. Insufficient as that paradise was, something comes along to destroy it and knocks the slats out of our life. And that's a voyage to the underworld, out of the walled garden into chaos. And so what is all of that? Well, there's lots of ways of construing it. It's a frame transformation. There's a walled city. It's got a hole in it, because all walled cities have holes in them, right? Because everything's imperfect, and that's where the chaos comes up. And then maybe you go out there like a hero to fight the chaos and to reestablish the frame. That's what you're supposed to do. And maybe you free some information while you're doing that. Or maybe you establish a relationship. And so that's the journey. Frame, damage, chaos, voluntary confrontation, reconstitution of the world. And that's human existence. And hopefully it's not just linear. It's stepwise, right? Is that the you that emerges as a consequence of your latest catastrophe is everything that you were before plus something more. And that actually constitutes what you might describe as measurable progress, right? And that's another argument against moral relativism, because if you can do everything that you could do before and you can do some more things, we could just define that as better.